Ever heard the stories about Keanu Reeves disappearing from everyone for a while? No paparazzi shots, no events, nothing. People thought he was taking a break or working on some secret project. The real reason was way heavier than that. Keanu didn't step back because he felt like being private. He stepped back because his life collapsed in a way most people don't come back from. People guessed it was stress, a new role, maybe even method acting, but the truth wasn't any of that. Something happened in Keanu's life that hit so hard it pulled him completely out of the world for a while. And that something wasn't just one single tragedy, but a series of losses so devastating, so close together, that isolation became the only way he could keep breathing. The world saw a celebrity taking a break. What they didn't see was a man whose entire future had been ripped away in the span of 18 months. This created a version of him that the world finds mysterious. Not the John Wick assassin with a tragic backstory, but a real man who learned to survive by pulling back from the noise around him. And once you know what he went through, those vanishings make a lot more sense. But we'll get to that. First, you need to see how the patterns started long before fame and long before John Wick turned him into a legend. Keanu Reeves didn't have the steady, picture-perfect childhood people imagine when they think of a major movie star. His early years were a mix of constant moves, new schools, and a home life that never quite settled. His mom worked non-stop, so the family hopped from city to city. They stayed in New York for a while, then Sydney, then Toronto. Keanu was always the new kid, always trying to find his place before the next move came along. What made those years rougher was the gap his father left behind. His dad abandoned the family when Keanu was just 3. He was arrested for possession of heroin and cocaine and sentenced to 10 years in jail in 1994 before being released in 1996. He never came back after that, nor did he bother to speak to Keanu. One day, he was part of Keanu's life, and then he wasn't. That kind of thing hits a kid differently. You learn to depend on yourself early. You learn to keep your guard up. And you learn not to expect people to stick around. That's the foundation. That's where the isolation instinct gets planted. In an interview, Reeves even said that his relationship with his dad is full of pain and woe. School didn't make things easier. Keanu has talked openly about dealing with dyslexia, and it meant he had to work twice as hard just to keep up. Reading took him longer than it took most kids. Classrooms felt frustrating and overwhelming. But it also pushed him to rely on things that did come naturally, like noticing details, reading people, and trusting his instincts more than the words on a page. Funny enough, those instincts later became part of his on-screen presence, including the quiet focus people see in his action roles. All of this shaped the way he interacts with the world today. It built the calm, private, almost guarded personality people now call mysterious. And just when it seemed like he was settling into adulthood with that quiet, introverted nature, he met someone who brought a different kind of light into his life. Keanu Reeves met Jennifer Syme at a time when his career was taking off and his personal life finally seemed calm. She worked in the entertainment world too, so they understood each other in a way that made things easy. Their relationship was warm and uncomplicated. They weren't trying to be a Hollywood power couple. They were just two people who felt comfortable together. When they found out they were expecting a child, it became the center of their world. Keanu talked about how excited he was to become a father, something he never really had growing up. For the first time, it felt like he had a future that didn't revolve around film sets or interviews. It was a rare moment where his life outside Hollywood was brighter than the one inside it. He started thinking about stability, about building a family, about finally having the kind of home life he'd never experienced as a child. Everything seemed to be falling into place. And then, In December 1999, everything shattered. Their daughter, Ava, was stillborn. The loss hit them both hard and pulled them into a quiet space most people never saw. They stopped going out. They spoke less and tried to cope in their own ways. Losing a child affects every corner of a person's life, and Keanu carried that weight in a way that made him even more isolated than before. For Keanu, this was the collapse of the future he'd been building, the family he'd never had as a kid, the father he wanted to become, the life that finally felt stable. All of it was gone in a moment. And the world kept spinning as if nothing had happened. Their relationship didn't survive the grief, although they still cared for each other deeply. People close to them said they stayed in touch and supported each other even as they tried to rebuild their separate lives. It's the kind of emotional wound that never really closes. You see traces of that stillness in the way he plays certain roles, where he moves like someone who has lived through something heavy. This chapter left a shadow that followed him for years and shaped the way he handled everything that came next. But then, just when it seemed like they were both finding their footing, tragedy found them again. Wanting to move past the tragedy of losing their daughter, Jennifer tried rebuilding her life again. She went back to work, reconnected with friends, and kept Keanu close without letting the past crush her. She was moving forward, or at least trying to. Then, early one morning in April 2001, everything stopped. Jennifer was driving home from a party when her car crashed. She died at the scene. No warning, and no chance for a goodbye. She was just gone. This was a single moment that knocked the air out of Keanu's chest. And this, right here, is the dark secret that forced Keanu Reeves into isolation. Not one loss, but two. The news shook Hollywood, sure, but it hit Keanu differently. This wasn't just another celebrity tragedy. This was someone he had shared real pieces of himself with. Someone who had lived through that devastating loss with him. Losing her after everything they'd already survived? It felt impossible. Unreal. A grief-stricken Keanu carried her coffin as she was laid to rest beside their daughter. Think about that for a second. In the span of 18 months, Keanu lost his unborn child and the woman he loved. The family he'd dreamed of building was gone. The future he'd imagined didn't exist anymore. And the world expected him to just keep showing up, keep smiling, keep being Keanu Reeves. He couldn't. So he didn't. He went quiet for a long time after that. Not the dramatic kind of silence, just the kind where grief moves in, sits down, and refuses to leave. He withdrew from public life. He stopped doing interviews. He avoided events. He lived in seclusion at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in Los Angeles for 4 years, calling it home because the idea of building a real home felt impossible now. This is the isolation everyone noticed, but nobody understood. This is the disappearance that sparked rumors and speculation. And this is the pain he carried alone, because talking about it wouldn't bring them back. We got to see a glimpse of that grief years later in the first John Wick movie. Remember that scene where his character sits on the floor, holding the letter his late wife left for him? He doesn't say much in that scene. He just sits there, letting the grief settle in. It's not a dramatic explosion of emotion. It's just a man alone with a loss he can't undo. That's real. That's what Keanu knew. There was no revenge arc in his actual life. And no dramatic breakdown, too. He was just a man trying to breathe through another loss that came too soon, too suddenly, and cut way too close. With his domestic dreams shattered, Keanu embraced a rootless existence. He remained single, lived out of suitcases, and avoided putting down roots because roots had only brought him pain. Jennifer's passing reopened old wounds and also created entirely new ones that shaped how Keanu moved through the world from that point forward. But here's where it gets even heavier. Keanu had to navigate all of this while dealing with personal challenges most people don't see. The dyslexia he'd struggled with since childhood became even harder to manage under the weight of grief. Reading scripts felt impossible. Memorizing lines took twice as long. The trauma from losing two of the most important people in his life made everything harder. That's why he took breaks during this period. That's why he seemed to vanish. It wasn't a career strategy, but for survival. Beyond that, Keanu has also had a series of injuries from his work on physically demanding roles, especially in action films like The Matrix. These injuries were tests of endurance, pain, and focus. Combine that with early emotional scars, and it's easy to see why he gravitates towards solitude at times. But here's the thing. Those personal battles made him resourceful. They trained him to rely on patience, observation, and resilience. Even in the middle of high-octane films, you can sense his careful precision, a focus that feels lived in rather than practiced. It's the same energy that makes his characters so believable, but it's also rooted in a life that demanded adaptability, long before he became Keanu Reeves. All the losses, struggles, and secret battles in Keanu Reeves's life built a version of him the public rarely gets to see. He moves through the world with that calm, almost guarded energy, the kind people notice in interviews, red carpets, or even in passing on the street. It's a reflection of someone who's survived more than most of us can imagine and learned that privacy can be protected. Grief and personal challenges also shaped the roles he chose. Characters like Neo in The Matrix or John Wick carry that same measured focus, the intensity of someone who's experienced loss but keeps moving forward. It's subtle, precise, and believable because it mirrors real life. Outside of his films, the world sees a man who is generous yet private, humble yet commanding, someone who values depth over flash. Every gesture, every interview, every act of kindness carries echoes of a life shaped by hardship. So, when people ask why Keanu Reeves is so mysterious, why he disappeared for years, why he lives the way he does, the answer is simple and devastating. He lost everything that mattered in the span of 18 months. His daughter, his partner, his future. And isolation became the only way he knew how to survive. That's the dark secret. Not a scandal, not a controversy. Just an unbearable, unimaginable loss. And it's the combination of his resilience and empathy, born from surviving the unthinkable, that makes Keanu Reeves feel real and, frankly, unforgettable.